Good morning. Welcome, everyone, to this session of dialogue with high levels and futures of data. My name is Marco Miyaguro, and I am the from the Parliament Executive of the American States. And this is the first of the two sessions that we're going to be having and for LATAM and data for 2021 LATAM opens with data from the future. If you require interpretation, you can find it at the lower end of the screen or wherever you are connecting from the YouTube channel or tutor, and you will have translation and you will find it in the YouTube channel or in the Twitter of the session. In the city of Panama today, I'm grateful to be here, who is the host country of LATAM opens up with data, and we have three people who are authoritarians of this topic for transparency and access to information. Anti in the Republic of Panama, Dr. Elsa Fernandez, and I also have Mr. Fabricio Mena, Subsecretary of Innovation from El Salvador with the Presidency of the Republic. And we also have in this session, a high level session, Mr. Fabrizio Scorlini from Montevideo, the General Director of the Latin America Initiative for Open Data. Thank you very much for being with us in this high level dialogue with Data from the Future. And together, we are going to create a dialogue based on the point of view of the government regarding perspectives of open data in the region for the following decades, confronting democracy and development. The good news is that this event, this transmission, is part of the agenda of LATAM opens with data this week. And again, congratulating ABRE LATAM for these last 2 days. The multiplicity of panels that we have had have been very enriching in order to strengthening the data for open data throughout regional level. And without further ado, in this moment, I would like to ask a question to all three, Elsa, Fabrizio Mena, and Fabrizio Sconini. Given that open data have advanced greatly in the region and policies have expanded, national policies have expanded, the ecosystem of open data has grown and become more technical, and this opening continues to flow. However, everything with all this, we also have challenges, particularly in expanding this opening, creating greater incidence in public policies with open data. Now, with this first instance and this quick introduction, what perspectives as knowledge holders and authorities of this topic, what do you think in terms of this open data in the situation of this region and this in front of the democracy? And I would like to pass the word to Dr. Elsa Fernandez. It is a pleasure to meet you, and it is a pleasure to have you as one of the invitees here. And so thank you very much. Thank you for having us with you in this project. We've been working with this project. My greetings to Fabricio and Engineer Mena and all of these people who are listening to us and public servants from Latin American Panama. And we are very happy with this event. And we are positioning Panama in this topic. And as you said, it is a challenge not only for our country, but it is also a challenge for Latin America. The situation that the pandemic has brought forth is a life changer for each and every one of us, especially for our country as well. And so now that we're talking about the topic related to open data and the perspective and of transparency that contributes, in the case of Panama, open government that that has already showed the fourth plan, and with the objective of using technological platforms that allow us the open data. So the social demand has required this because of all of the events that have occurred. And today we're not only talking about open data in terms of transparency, rather we're also talking about the terms of transparency in terms of impacting the education, impacting the economic reactivation, because today the problems are completely different. And so it is very necessary because these open data are going to help us innovate. And this will take us to new solutions to new problems. And these new solutions need to go hand in hand with the fundamental aspects of public administration, which is a citizen. The citizen participation that needs to be the center of each and every one. This it needs to be the central axis of each and every one of the open data, because at the end, this data is the in the state, the greatest one. The people who have most people are the ones who have most open data or require most open data. To why? For entrepreneurship, there are many people with high demands. And when we're talking about economic reactivation that require these responses, and public institutions need to provide these answers. And that is what I have to mention. Thank you so much, Dr. Elsa, for this first intervention. And it is very important that the challenges today are not the ones that we were seeing a couple of years ago. And definitely, we need to connect the open data in this process, and it is a very important challenge. I would like to pass the word to Scolini Montevideo, which is the executive director of Open Data, and so that you could talk to us about the perspective regarding the open data in in front of democracy. And first off, we are going to ask Fabrizio Scolini from Montevideo, who's going to be doing his intervention. So the complicated aspect is to have two Fabricios in the panel. It's not a common name, so we have coincided here. So, well, we would like to thank you for the space that you have generated, and we would like to commend that there are a lot of topics that are emerging here, and we can see it in all of the messages in Twitter and in YouTube. And when you're talking about this question, my head just explodes because there's so much information that's that's coming out here. And so, when talking in terms of this, it would be better to have a few trends that we're going to look forward to. The first one is the importance of the data. The importance of data is only going to be present today. It is visible in terms of companies, in terms of government, and in terms of their data. They are showing their data and values in another way. How do you measure those values? We're still thinking about that, but what we are considering this value as high and very, very clear. And this is just going to continue. If the opening is going to continue, as democracy has been debated, between continuing or not, the opening is a sign of democracy. It is a sign of identity. And so, in a given way, if you are talking about evolutions in a democratic aspect, we will be seeing more open data, and not just for transparency, but also to generate social and economic networks. What we've seen is that it is very predominant in the region is to open the first step in order to provide the second generation of activists, companies, academics, uh, creating value in this data. I see this a lot in Latin America, and the question is, how is the future going to be? Is it Are these creations as a local property? Does it make sense for the inhabitants of the region? And well, these are basically activities or entrepreneurships that are extractive. And so also we need to think about the economy of these things that are going to be essential. So what is important, and in this sense we do have a wave of rights that are linked to the opening to open data, and this is essential to connect with other rights that citizens have, as participation, as the rights to control, and basically how to take up a genuine well-formed participation. And now we have a lot to do here, and also checking on the construction of the citizens, where the open data have a lot to do here when we do it in a coordinated manner, not so far away in the future to. But well, on the other hand, we have other rights to protect, which has to do with the diversity, the use, the biodiversity, the use of other data, and what infrastructure will allow us to do that. And we have this is also an important discussion to keep up with. And so, as the future is in order to check on this, we need to we need to deep dive into the policies. We need to keep in mind the rights of the citizens and see how it is affecting us in the digital era, and how much can we do this, and what type of economy is needed in order for it to be sustainable. And so this is my first reflection in terms of open data in Latin America. And so the future is the present. So the decisions that we make today or we imagine today, in some way or the other, will be affecting up in the upcoming times. So thank you so much, Fabrizio Escolini. And so you are coming throughout the framework of LATAM, discussing the future of open data, and to be able to listen the leadership in terms of data. And these three reflections that you have are very important. And so we would go back very briefly as soon as we can to talk about one of these points that you mentioned that I feel are extremely important. How the name Fabricio may not be so common. I should almost say that the future of open data will take the name of Fabricio. And for this, because of this, I will invite Fabricio Mena, Subsecretary of Innovation in the Republic of Salvador, to share with us his reflections on perspectives of open data in front of democracy. Welcome, Fabricio. Fabricio is here in Panama with us, and he is in person with us, so welcome. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be with you in the session. And well, this name Fabricio is not really common, especially with a Z, because Fabricio Strolini is also spelled with a Z in his name. And so, thank you so much for being with us, and all of the people that are with us throughout different social networks. And more than thinking what is the future of open data, I'm going to do a quick summary of the two previous panelists, because as it is well said, it's not the future, it's actually the present, and it is a reality that we're living nowadays. And it is true that the pandemic has accelerated different procedures and different processes, and one of those had to do with open data. And so the governments are more participating, even more, they're more transparent, and we're providing these rights even more now so to the citizens. And because the pandemic obliged us to be in our homes, and all of us had to adapt to this new reality. And while it is true that in order to develop a correct policy and adequate policy on open data and all of these data, it is extremely important that it shouldn't just be open data, rather it has to be completely useful for the population, because it is of no use that a government should have all of its platforms, all of its documentations in an open data format, and have it completely available for the population for its full use, if the citizens are not even going to know how they're going to use it. So, in order to develop an ideal policy on open data, and I would say, and this is the future, honestly, we need to establish three bases. Number one, as Fabrizio mentioned, is the literacy in citizenships, as in citizens, excuse me, as to how can they use this open data, what are the benefits in terms of transparency, in terms of citizen participation, and the other part aspect are the rights that the citizens have and how can they actually use those rights, and the adequate development of a regulatory framework and policy so that the open data can transform and can start being useful for the citizens. And we should also focus that the government and all of this information is also to provide fundamental rights to citizens that they always have had it, but in one way or the other, governments have denied this or have stopped them from getting this information. And this is not something that is in fashion or it's an international discussion. It is actually the rights of citizens for citizen participation. And so, as I was mentioning, citizens need to know how to use this and what advantage can they get from this. And that is the future. All of these values and all of these strategies that are completely adequate and can be well accompanied in order to bring this to the rights of everyone. Thank you so much, Fabrizio Mena, and your reflection. I would like I would like to, before continuing with the next section and question, just talk about some of the actions that are subconsequent, more than just facilitating the session and talking about LATAM with the ABRE LATAM Condatos. LATAM opens up with data, supporting the regional agenda, supporting projects in open data formats. Definitely a multilateral organization procuring that the opening of governments of data should contribute to democratic governance. This was evident to presidents and heads of state in the region in the Americas acquiring commitments on open data within the framework of the Lima Commitment, and also calling upon the new generation, which is the Inter American data to prevent open data for Inter-American agency to prevent data, uh, and this is completely fundamental to be able to uh, provide an advancement and the strengthening of open data in the prevention of democracy, making sure that the Inter-American program, in order to combat corruption, continues to implement in all of the region, in all of the countries in the region. And so, going in front of this democracy, I would like to mention that you have already mentioned that this is one of the pillars that has been working on. And the second question is very similar to the first one. And this is something that the OAS has been working on as well. And so many are the commitments on generating economic value on open data. But according to you, and according to the investments in open data, what is the open data in terms of socioeconomic development? What are the perspectives that you see, and how does open data impact in terms of development? And so we're going to continue with this dynamic that we had in the first session. And I would like that at this time, very cordially, uh, pass the floor to Dr. Elsa Fernandez. Welcome. Thank you very much. And as you have mentioned, Open data has taken up a lot of relevance, and as we mentioned a while ago, it can be an experience here in Panama. We had an experience with the private sector, and the working group for open data, which is an alliance of the National Authority for Transparency and Access to Information. And they are precisely here in the private sector to see precisely what were the elements that they considered most relevant in that are need to be considered on behalf of the government in order to um, generate the to promote open data and the utilization, as well as Fabricio mentioned. It's not just the data, that the data needs to generate value. And so this is where we have a direct communication when we talk about democracy. And the problem is that this generation of knowledge generates a communication within civil society towards the government. And the idea is to create a calling to provide solution, be it for public policies, and they need to be effective. And this is where once we have the data, once we analyze this data, what are the institutions that create a response in the public sector? When we're talking in terms of the economic sector, we need to see what are the institutions that are linked in economic aspects, in public aspects, tourism, culture, and also the what are the series of companies that are sustaining and contributing economically to our country, specifically talking about Panama. And so the an interinstitutional development is definitely going to evidence the positioning of open data and how this is going to comply with open data, which is a product of a deacceleration. And Panama was one of the countries that was definitely affected. I mean, not just because we have the Panama Canal. So for us, open data creates a greater relevance. So as you can see, we have an open public policy in November 2017. We have had advancement, as Fabricio was mentioning, in this knowledge that has contributed the OAS. And you can say that you have been an ally for us, where we have a knowledge that we indicated that two allies of this country should benefit from the knowledge of open data, and how this reality takes to the opening of projects in order to be known in each and every one of the spaces. So, as I can say, the relevance and impact depends on the exercise of public policies, and the interest in this case needs to be seen on behalf of democracy, because when we're talking about democracy, we're talking about access to information. And the open data policy has that end goal to provide a response to the citizens, that citizens can, if there's no information, they will not be able to generate any type of design for the project in order to reactivate themselves economically. And this is more than anything, we should have a commitment at state level in order to provide an opportune, adequate aspect for and good quality of data. At the end, that it should be of service of value towards the citizens. Thank you very much, Doctor, for this answer. I think it is very important. The training on citizens, this ecosystem that gives the opportunity to provide a generation of value on this data, value which is going to be definitely social but economic as well. And those who measure the reality will require to measure this data. And so the express knowledge to generate capacity on citizenship so that they can understand the use and take advantage of open data will be fundamental. And the data that will be available for this. And so definitely the role of governments And also, it will be not only for the citizens, but rather to make sure that there is a dynamic for this ecosystem outside of the government in order to generate a value for the generation of this data. So it is very important, this reflection that you bring forth to us, Dr. Elsa. Thank you very much. I would like to continue with also, we would like to continue with Scalini in Montevideo in terms of this. What could you input in terms of this? It is very interesting as to where are we heading. Also, it would be based on the states in order to generate clear laws. And in terms of the security of the data, we need to think of it being extremely comprehensive, because if the open data does not sustain itself in terms of its clear end goal, we will not be able to generate value for it. And then we will have to think a little bit more about these laws that facilitate the reuse, and potentially under certain standards. Also, we need to see how to share the data, not just in the private aspect, but also the private sector towards the government. And this is a discussion that that need to be mentioned in an economic level in terms of security. So here, the adequate information of this might be able to help us with the economic and social development. The next one has to do with productive aspects in terms of the companies that can, in addition to have access to data, to have significant, that is significant, also to give another type of support. And this creates a synergy between the academics and the universities and the power in order to advance at the time of generating companies that can develop this type of aid, because data are extremely important to generate a chain of value. And in order to create budgeting, for example, what happens in Brazil, up to companies that are dedicated in local areas and recommending better properties, um, in a particular area, right? So this type of local data are required in order to do this. Now, of course, in this process, in thirdly, how this development helps us, helps favor us expanding the gaps of inequality that exist in our society. And it is difficult to do this. And without a doubt, it is one of the risks that are present. And without a doubt, the government has a role in the private sector. So these three aspects, regulation, creation of economic value, investigation with this private sector, and thinking about the consequences of equality and inequalities, which will be part of the development in Latin America. Thank you so much, Fabrizio Scorlini. Definitely connecting the open data with the ecosystem of innovation is a fundamental and almost like a debt. Not, I don't know if you share with me this aspect in terms of the private sector and you that have taken a pathway towards the private sector and the generation of economic and commercial value. I feel as one of the pathways that have been taken very slow in the last 10 years. I'm not sure whether you share with me this aspect. I have seen these spaces, but I don't think that it is that way. It is a topic related to connection, a new generation of companies, and more or less companies that are emerging in Latin America. So, without a doubt, I think there is a good opportunity in order to achieve a greater line in this. Very well. Thank you so much, Fabricio. Fabricio Mena, in El Salvador, you have created an important proposal for cryptocurrencies and emerging technologies. Obviously, data are important in that scenario. Do you share our reflection in terms of perspectives of development in open data? I'm going to talk to you about the strategy that Salvador has in terms of open data and what is the pathway that we have planned, mainly because for the development of the country that goes hand in hand with an economic development as well. A few months ago, within the Secretariat of Innovation, we created a specific directorate for in terms of open data, and then we wanted to go further off than just data governance. What generates the open data? What generates this governance of data at the end? The private sector and the academics and civil society generates necessary guarantees, and so this is what countries need for investors and private companies can do their part because this is what's going to bring forth a real economic development or a development for our countries. Because if we can have an ideal and adequate policy which is completely implemented in terms of open data, investors from other countries are going to completely feel incentivized or are going to feel incited to go continue investing because it is a completely the data is completely transparent and there's nothing to hide up to a certain point. So then right now we have the Bitcoin as a legal currency, and as a matter of fact, this country, in our country, we have a Bitcoin week where different investors from different countries have come forth to see business opportunities in our country. We have seen from the government perspective, not just on our end, not just to encourage, but also create transparency where everything we can make transparent, creating a real policy on open data and participation and citizen participation in order to create real development for our country. Thank you so much. It is good to hear these reflections from you. And something very important that you mentioned was regarding to see open data as a guarantee of freedom, just almost as a guarantee of sovereignty, and to have this resource, just we have like oil, petrol data. These data speak a lot about the importance of open data, and in order to have an explosion on this. And thank you so much. These three rounds of questions, this is what we wanted to have as perspective. And I would like to go forward in this remaining few moments because the reflections that you presented, there is a great absence there in terms of open data. But regarding open data and the decentralized governments or local governments and the implication that this has in the strengthening of government data, that has its implications. So I would like to know if you could share your end reflections on terms of how do you see this data in national governments, number one, and number two, how um, fast do you see this advancement in open data? We see this decade of investment policies, portals, openings, but how fast are we advancing in the next decades? I mean, it is true that we are with working with the local governments, and how do you see public institutions uh, moving with and moving with this topic. So I would first pass the floor to Dr. Fernandez, and thank you so much, Mike. So I would like to mention 2 weeks ago we were traveling, and we were in route to we were using this tour called the Tour to Transparency. We did it virtually and now in person, where 81 municipalities had the possibility of doing going forth. And one of the topics that we were mentioning in this tour of transparency was regarding open data and the importance of the same, because the program has been development the from the National Authority for Transparency and Access to Information by Juan Paulo Rodriguez. And so, how can we impact the data so that it impacts sustainable development? And so now we have a meeting with the uh, in charges or heads of these departments, and in order to and with the major with the mayor in order to develop these topics. And so we are also going to talk about we develop platforms. 2020 was the topic on ethics, which we are promoting today. And now throughout this country uh, we have we have been receiving training in terms of transparency and so other aspects that well position the topic. And so we hope for the year 2022 is the year of open data in our country in order to develop this public policy, which is a responsibility not only for on behalf of Antay, but also the public sector, that we have the social debt that we are socially indebted to, and also the impact that it holds and the responsibility that it has from the opening of from the open data aspect in order to create these policies to give efficient responses that the state is obliged to give to each and every one of their citizens. And so we are developing this, and we have the prospect of 2022 where we can achieve develop a greater development with the topic of ethics, and then develop this aspect in our country so that we can be within the region one of the countries in the topic of open data, create an impact in pandemics and by the pandemic. Very well. Thank you so much, Dr. Elsa, for your answer. So the end reflections on this. Fabrizio, could you please provide us with end reflections on this topic? I'm not sure if I'm the one here. Yes, I am. So it is interesting. What is the pathway that we are covering? Because now I'm coming from this space talking about the future. uh, I am at a point where we need to clearly think, where are we evolving? What is the role that we are going to have in open data? So for me, we have three pathways that we need to explore, and at the same time generate discussions, debates on behalf of the government. And on one end, definitely our region needs to think in how this new economy going to be, and how is it going to genuinely benefit and connect this with the other democratic values. So this is essential. And so there are many things that happen. And so we need to remember that however well intended are the transactions, our all of our society are filled with inequalities and issues as such, and things that have been developed throughout the history of this continent. And United States and many things have come up, and this has been reflected in the data. So if they would be visible, and if they would be visible, and they might be object to actions or discrimination, so we need to understand what are we developing with this story. On the other hand, we have the possibility of going forth with it, and this makes us think a little bit in terms of justice, whether data are an avenue to think about these topics and social aspects. And this is also a topic that our democracy needs to think about. And I must mention that connecting this to the sustainability of it, the need on behalf of the states and behalf of the multilateral organisms. We have an entire aspect of private sector to analyze the investment to have a vicious cycle in terms of this. And so there is an opportunity for this. We see examples in the region for this. So I wouldn't say that it is unreachable. And then again, it connects with the type of democracy that we would like to construct, the type of democracy again that we would like to construct. So in a time, a continent that's that is that has inequalities, a continent that's marked with these type of issues, definitely there will be varied, but the type of infrastructure of data that we have and the use that we will be giving it will be determining, or this is my hypothesis, that it will determine the strengthening of economies. And definitely I am on the side of strengthening the economies. So thank you very much, Fabrizio. And now I will pass the floor to Fabrizio Mena from El Salvador, the final reflections regarding this. Thank you, Mike. Well, the specific strengthening all of this initiatives on open data and having a very clear pathway, and in order to strengthen the central government and creating these alliances, and all of us in here in El Salvador are also going to implement this, and creating these alliances with the municipal governments in order for so that they can adapt different types of policies, comprehensive policies in terms of open data. And this can help us primarily in strengthening democracies. In El Salvador, we are not having only a vision of what can we do in order to transform, creating this project that would be more participative, and not just stay within our borders, but also along with other countries that integrate SICTA. And we are working on a policy of open data in a more regional aspect, so that more countries in the region can advance together. And as Fabricio was mentioning, the majority of our democracies in Latin America bring forth this ghost, as to say, or has been taking carrying this ghost for a very long time. So we need to advance, taking huge steps forward. And so, just to say so, the democracy of Central America are the ones that are most damaged, the longest period of times. And so, if we can advance as a region together as Latin America, we will be able to strengthen even more these policies, these open data policies, and start strengthening this along with our democracies. Of course, for this, we need the direct commitment of the civil society that has to do that will be participating in all of these initiatives, and also the heads of government in order to implement and give it a proper follow up to all of the public policies that need to be under open data. And thank you so much, Mr. Fabricio Mena. Thank you to all three. Thanks to all three of you. And so we have had a good exchange. And I would like to leave you with a task for all three of you at this time. In one word, could you define open data of the future? And I will thank you, and I will let you think a little bit on that word, thanking Dr. Elsa, Fabrizio Mena, and Fabrizio Scorlini for their participation in this fundamental exchange in open data, and definitely for the democracy and development, and above all, thanking the host country and Antai and DG for this conditioning in order to bring forth ABRE LATAM with data to 2021 and uh, this high level conversation. We do invite you in this session on Friday 5 p.m. Panama time. We will be having three authorities that are going to be exchanging information in the future of open data. And stay informed through the number ticket on open data of the future, the social network for public for an effective public management, and Abre Latam with data. So all of you who are seeing us through our social network, thank you very much. So in order to uh, take our leave, Elsa, Fabricio Escorlini, Fabricio Mena, what are these three words that talk about the future of open data in the region? For me, the word will be growth, an opportunity for growth for open data. Fabrizio Scolini, evolution, an opportunity to evolve. Growth and evolution. Fabrizio Mena. Fabrizio with a Z. Of course, progress would be the word. Growth, evolution, and progress. Three words that point out to what open data are going to do in the future. So we are going to use these three words in order to cover up open data. Thank you. Thanks to everyone who connected today in this dialogue. Thank you very much and have a good night. Good night, Carlos.